dust, and a desperate plea. The wind howled a mournful dirge, rattling the windows in their frames. Dust, fine as sifted flour, seeped through the cracks, coating every surface in a gritty film. Clara coughed, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She'd seen dust storms before, plenty of them, but this one felt different, angrier. A tumbleweed, a skeletal dancer of the plains, slammed against the front door with a dull thud that reverberated through the small house. Clara watched the storm from the window, her reflection a pale ghost superimposed on the swirling brown chaos outside. The wind buffeted the house, each gust a reminder of her isolation. She'd grown accustomed to the solitude, even found a certain peace in it, but sometimes on nights like these, the silence pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. A scratching at the door startled her. Not the wind this time, not the tumbleweed. Something more deliberate. Hesitantly, Clara approached the door, her hand hovering over the latch. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice barely audible above the storm's fury. A weak voice, raspy and strained, answered, "Please help." Clara threw open the door, bracing herself against the force of the wind. A figure slumped against the porch railing, barely visible through the swirling dust. As the air cleared momentarily, she recognized Jed, the rancher from the double bar, though he was nearly unrecognizable. His face was gaunt, streaked with dirt and tear tracks. He clutched a small bundle in his arms. "Jed? What happened?" Clara gasped, rushing to his side. He looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. "Clara, I don't know where else to go." He swayed, his grip on the bundle loosening. "Come inside, quickly," Clara urged, supporting him with her arm. She managed to drag him and his precious cargo into the relative safety of her home, slamming the door shut against the relentless storm. The small house felt instantly warmer, a haven against the raging elements. Clara guided Jed to the worn armchair by the fireplace, gently easing him down. The bundle in his arms stirred, and a tiny whimper pierced the air. "Hope," Jed whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "My daughter, Hope." Clara knelt beside him, her heart aching at the sight of his distress. Carefully, she peeled back the blanket covering the baby's face. Hope was tiny, her skin pale and delicate, her eyes closed in peaceful slumber. "What happened, Jed? Tell me," Clara asked softly, her voice full of concern. He took a shuddering breath, his gaze fixed on his daughter. "They accused me, Clara, of stealing cattle. Said I'd been rustling from Harper's spread." Clara frowned. Jed had always seemed an honest man, hard-working and forthright. She couldn't imagine him stealing. "But why?" "Harper always wanted my land," Jed said bitterly. "Said it was rightfully his. I refused to sell. He must have framed me somehow." He continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "They took everything, Clara. My ranch, my cattle, everything. My wife, she died giving birth to Hope. The stress, the worry, it was too much for her." He choked back a sob. "Now, I have nothing. Just Hope. They said I wasn't fit to be a father, that I was a thief and a liar." Clara reached out, gently placing her hand on his arm. "I don't believe it, Jed. I don't believe you'd do such a thing." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and despair. "Thank you, Clara. But what am I going to do? I have nowhere to go, no one to turn to." "You're not alone, Jed," Clara said firmly, her voice filled with a newfound resolve. "You're here now, and I'm not going to let them take Hope away from you." She stood up, her back straight, her gaze unwavering. "First, we need to get you both cleaned up and fed. Then, we'll figure out what to do next." As Clara tended to Jed and Hope, a sense of purpose filled her. She may have been alone for a long time, but she wasn't helpless. She had faced hardships before, and she had survived. She would help Jed, and she would protect Hope. The storm still raged outside, but inside the small house, a flicker of hope began to burn, fueled by compassion and a shared sense of injustice. Shelter from the storm. The tempest shrieked, assaulting Clara's little cabin, each gust a brutal reminder of the exposed land beyond. Jed, swaying like a wind-battered tree, bore the deep grooves of exhaustion on his grime-streaked face. Hope, a tiny bundle within meager cloth, offered only soft, plaintive whimpers. Clara's resolution hardened. "Inside," she commanded, a voice accustomed to the prairie's demands, allowing no argument. "Both of you." Hesitation clouded Jed's weary gaze, suspicion wrestling with a burgeoning gratitude. I can't be a burden." "Burden?" Clara's lips quirked in wry amusement. "To who? The jackrabbits? Buzzards? Honestly, mun, you and the little one need respite." She pulled them through the doorway, the wind nearly wresting it from her grip. Inside, the space was cramped yet pristine, imbued with the fragrance of cured herbs and a whisper of wood smoke. A lone kerosene lamp cast a wavering amber glow, illuminating spare furnishings, a solid table, a pair of mismatched chairs, a narrow cot nestled against the wall, and a small stove exuding welcome heat. Clara steered Jed toward a seat, his legs threatening to give way entirely. She received Hope with surprising gentleness, her touch belying her weathered exterior. Shivering, she noted a crease forming between her brows as she peeled back the threadbare covering. "This blanket offers scant protection. We must warm you, little bird." Clara vanished behind a hanging tapestry, reappearing with an armful of well-worn, plush blankets. She swaddled Hope securely, her actions economical and practiced. "There you go," she soothed, cradling the infant close. "Better now?" Jed looked on, his expression a blend of awe and profound thankfulness. He had not encountered such simple grace in what felt like an eternity. "Words fail me," he choked out. Clara dismissed his gratitude with a shrug. "Save the thanks. Just tell me what happened." As Jed unburdened himself, the sheer inequity of his situation flared within Clara. Fabricated charges, stolen inheritance, a wife lost too soon, a saga of suffering that resonated deeply within her. It echoed fragments of her own buried history, a past she rarely acknowledged. Upon the story's close, his voice rasped and his eyes swam with unshed tears. Clara reached out, her hand closing firmly over his forearm. Her grip was unexpectedly potent, anchoring him. "Rest," she urged, "and those wounds require tending." She assessed his injuries, her mouth a thin line. The cuts and contusions were numerous, some suppurating. They were not delicate, she observed, more to herself than to him. Clara set about cleansing the wounds with heated water and a pungent antiseptic. Jed flinched as the solution bit into his skin, but he remained silent, bearing the discomfort. Clara's touch remained steady and sure, betraying a practiced hand. She had witnessed far worse, she knew. After tending to his person, Clara brewed a simple soup of chicken and root vegetables. She gently urged Jed to eat, guiding the spoon to his mouth when his tremors made holding it impossible. Meanwhile, Hope stirred in her improvised bed. A reclaimed crate softened with layers of linen. A thin, reedy cry escaped her. Jed stiffened, panic clouding his features. I'm helpless," he confessed, his voice trembling. I know nothing of infants." Clara exhaled softly, a flicker of resignation in her gaze. This undertaking would be more demanding than initially perceived. "Come," she offered, carefully lifting Hope from the crate. "Allow me to demonstrate." She showed him how to support the baby's delicate head and neck, demonstrated how to inspect and change her swaddling, how to coax a burp, how to soothe her with gentle, rhythmic motions. "Speak to her," Clara instructed. "She needs the sound of your voice." Jed hesitated, then began to murmur to his daughter. He recounted his ambitions for her, of reclaiming their ranch, of the mother she would never know. As he spoke, Hope seemed to find solace, her cries dwindling into soft sighs of contentment. Clara observed them, a spark of something akin to tenderness flickering within her. It had been a long while since she had witnessed such raw devotion. She knew then that she couldn't merely offer temporary refuge. She must assist them in reclaiming their purloined life. While the storm raged relentless fury beyond the walls, A fragile seed of hope sprouted within the humble dwelling, nourished by the selflessness of a solitary woman and the unwavering love of a father for his child. Finding strength, facing prejudice. The morning broke with crystalline clarity, a far cry from the storm's furious assault the previous night. Despite a limp that still plagued his injured leg, Jed was determined to aid Clara. Hope, nestled contentedly in a sling Clara had ingeniously crafted from a flour sack, cooed softly against his chest. "Don't overdo it," Clara cautioned, her gaze following his every move as he gingerly placed weight on the limb. "Gotta pull my weight," Jed replied, a spark of resolve in his eyes. "And yours, for that matter. That fence has seen better days, wouldn't you say?" He nodded toward the decaying barrier separating Clara's modest grazing land from the untamed wilderness. Knowing further protest was useless, Clara simply conceded with a nod. "Tools are in the shed. Mind yourself now." The steady thud of Jed's hammer resonated through the crisp morning air. Clara, meanwhile, tended her flock, tossing handfuls of grain and gathering the patterned eggs. She watched Jed, a quiet gratitude blooming within her. Strength radiated from him, not merely physical, but an indomitable spirit, a man willing to stand firm for what he cherished. The labor, though clearly taxing, seemed to breathe new life into him. As the sun arced higher, Clara approached with water, the icy liquid a welcome balm. "Thank you, Clara," Jed said, wiping his forehead with a calloused hand. It means more than words can say." Clara only responded with a delicate, almost bashful smile. "Just doing what I reckon is right." It was during their return to the cottage, hope secure in Jed's arms, that they faced the first tremors of unrest. A knot of townsfolk, Mrs. Gable from the mercantile, old Hemlock gripping his constant companion Kane, and several others, stood assembled near the edge of Clara's land, their expressions set in harsh disapproval. As they drew closer, an oppressive quiet fell, their collective gaze a palpable weight. Mrs. Gable, her face a study in disapproval, broke the silence. "Clara Maeve, are you harboring a fugitive? We heard rumors of a stranger." "He's hurt," Clara countered, her voice unwavering despite the disquiet churning within. "He needed assistance. Injured or not, he spells trouble," Hemlock rasped, his voice like rocks grinding together. "He's a wanted man." "He's innocent," Clara insisted, her fingers tightening protectively on Jed's arm. She sensed the coiled tension in him, the impulse to defend himself, to safeguard his child. "Innocent folks don't flee," Mrs. Gable snapped back, her eyes raking over Jed's threadbare clothes and the infant in his arms with open suspicion. "He's likely a pilferer, perhaps a killer, for all we're aware." Jed moved forward, his jaw hardened. "I'm neither, ma'am, just striving to keep my daughter from harm." But the townsfolk remained unconvinced. They murmured amongst themselves, their furtive glances darting between Jed and Hope. The atmosphere thickened with unspoken accusations and thinly concealed fear. "We don't desire his sort here," Hemlock declared, punctuating his words with a sharp rap of his cane on the hard-packed earth. "He has to go." Clara stood resolute, her gaze unwavering. "He's staying. He needs time to recover, to sort things out." The standoff lingered, the quiet broken only by the whisper of leaves and Hope's gentle contentment. Finally, Mrs. Gable sniffed disdainfully. "You'll rue this choice, Clara Maeve. You'll regret siding with a lawbreaker." With that, she turned and, followed by the others, marched back toward town, their disapproving stares lingering like a lingering blight. As they vanished from sight, the burden of their judgment settled heavily on Clara's spirit. A chill snaked through her, despite the sun's warmth. Jed laid a hand on her arm, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I'm sorry, Clara," he murmured. "I didn't intend to bring this upon you." Clara regarded him, noting the weariness etched deeply on his features, the vulnerability glimmering in his eyes. She thought of Hope, so utterly defenseless, caught in the undertow of injustice. "It's not your doing," she asserted, her voice steady. They're merely frightened. But even as the words escaped her lips, a fragile seed of doubt began to take root. The townsfolk's bias was a potent force, and she knew, deep down, this was just the harbinger of what was to come. Back inside the modest cottage, the shadows seemed to stretch further, the hush more profound. Clara immersed herself in domestic tasks, attempting to ignore the gnawing sensation of isolation. She glanced at Hope, slumbering peacefully in her improvised cradle, and a powerful wave of protectiveness surged through her. She wouldn't yield to them. She wouldn't allow them to banish Jed and Hope. Yet, she suspected the cost of her defiance would be steep. She was already an outsider, a woman existing on the periphery of society. Now, she was becoming an outcast, and the solitude, which she had long grown accustomed to enduring, loomed, threatening to engulf her anew. The dry spell. The dust swirled with a malevolent glee, coating Clara's already struggling garden in a fine, suffocating film. The once vibrant green leaves of her tomato plants drooped, curling at the edges like burnt paper. The squash vines, usually bursting with plump yellow fruit, lay limp and lifeless. Even the hardy wildflowers she'd scattered along the fence line, normally defiant in the face of adversity, bowed their heads in defeat. The creek, usually a babbling brook, was now a cracked mud flat, reflecting the merciless glare of the sun. Clara knelt beside a withered pepper plant, the dry soil crumbling between her fingers. She'd always prided herself on her garden. It was more than just a source of food. It was a connection to the land, a tangible representation of her resilience. Now, it was slowly dying, mirroring the growing unease in her heart. She stood, brushing the dust from her worn denim overalls, and scanned the horizon. The sky was a relentless, cloudless blue, offering no hint of relief. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of parched earth. This dry spell was different. It wasn't the usual summer drought that they could usually weather. This felt ominous. Inside the small cabin, Jed paced, his brow furrowed with concern. Hope lay sleeping in her makeshift cradle, her tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. He dipped a cloth in the remaining water, carefully dabbing it on her forehead. The heat was relentless, even in the shade. He glanced at the dwindling supply of water in the clay jug. He had enough for a few more days, maybe if he rationed it carefully. But what then? Hope needed water to survive. He'd faced hardship before, hunger, cold, the constant fear of being caught. But this felt different. This wasn't just about him. He heard Clara enter, her footsteps heavy on the porch. He met her gaze, reading the worry etched on her face. "The well's getting low," she said, her voice tight. "Lower than I've ever seen it." Jed nodded, unable to meet her eyes. He was a burden, a mouth to feed in a time of scarcity. He should leave, take Hope, and find somewhere, anywhere with water. But the thought of leaving Clara, of abandoning the only safe haven they'd found, was unbearable. "We'll figure something out," Clara said, her voice firm, though her eyes betrayed her own fear. "We always do." In town, the mood was equally grim. Men gathered outside the general store, their faces etched with anxiety. The usual boisterous laughter was absent, replaced by hushed, worried conversations. "My cattle are starting to suffer," Silas, a rancher with a sprawling herd, lamented, wiping sweat from his brow. "The creeks dried up, and the grazing lands turned to dust." "Same here." Martha, who owned the bakery, chimed in. "I'm having to cut back on my baking. Can't waste water on bread people can't afford to buy anyway." Sheriff Brody stood on the porch of his office, watching the gathering crowd with a weary expression. He knew the drought was a powder keg just waiting for a spark. The fear and desperation could easily turn to anger, and he was the only thing standing between order and chaos. "We need to do something," a voice called out from the crowd. It was Thomas, the blacksmith, a burly man known for his quick temper. "We need to find a new water source." "And where do you propose we find one, Thomas?" Brody asked, his voice calm but firm. "We've scoured the whole area. There's nothing left." Maybe we need to look further afield," Thomas said, his eyes narrowing. Maybe we need to go beyond our own land. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The implication was clear. Someone else had water, someone they could take it from. Brody felt a cold dread creep into his heart. He knew where this was heading. Clara, Jed, and Hope were in trouble. The town's desperation was growing like weeds in the dying fields, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that they would be the first to feel its sharp sting. The dry spell wasn't just a threat to their livelihoods. It was a threat to their very existence. A hidden hope. The dust swirled with every gust of wind, coating everything in a fine, gritty film. Even the early morning dew, which had once been a reliable presence, now seemed a distant memory. Jed wiped the sweat from his brow, the back of his hand leaving a streak of mud across his forehead. He'd been walking the perimeter of Clara's land for hours, searching for any sign, any hint of a solution. Hope gurgled from the sling strapped to his chest, oblivious to the parched earth and the worry etched on her father's face. He'd noticed it yesterday, a patch of earth near the western boundary that seemed different, while the rest of the land was cracked and brittle. This small area retained a faint, almost imperceptible dampness. He dismissed it at first, attributing it to some trick of the light, but the image had lingered in his mind. Now, kneeling beside the patch, he ran his fingers through the soil. It was cool to the touch, noticeably moister than the surrounding ground. A surge of adrenaline coursed through him. Could it be? He started digging with his bare hands, the soil yielding more easily than he expected. Hope whimpered softly, and he paused to adjust her sling. "Almost there, little one," he murmured, planting a kiss on her downy head. Almost there. Deeper he dug, the dampness intensifying. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint, earthy scent. Then, his fingers struck something hard. He brushed away the remaining soil, revealing a flat, moss-covered stone. With a grunt of effort, he heaved the stone aside. Below, nestled in the earth, was a small pool of water shimmering in the dim light. A spring, hidden, untouched, a lifeline in this desolate landscape. He cupped his hands and tasted the water. Cool, clear, and sweet. Tears welled in his eyes. He scooped another handful and offered it to Hope. She smacked her lips and gurgled happily, reaching for more. He carefully replaced the stone, partially obscuring the spring, but leaving enough space for a small flow. He needed to tell Clara. He found her in the garden, her face streaked with dirt, her hands calloused and worn. She was coaxing a wilting tomato plant, whispering words of encouragement. He watched her for a moment, admiration swelling in his chest. She was a force of nature, a beacon of hope in a world that seemed determined to crush her spirit. "Clara," he said softly. She turned, her eyes widening as she took in his mud-caked appearance and the triumphant glint in his eyes. "I found something," he said, unable to suppress a grin. "Something you won't believe." He led her to the western boundary, Hope nestled securely in his arms. Clara's brow furrowed with concern as they approached the unassuming patch of earth. He removed the stone, revealing the hidden spring. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She knelt beside the pool, her fingers tracing the moss-covered edges. She dipped her hand in the water, bringing it to her lips. Her eyes closed, and a slow smile spread across her face. "It's a miracle," she whispered. They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the gentle gurgle of the spring. Then Jed spoke, his voice hesitant. "I was thinking maybe we should share it." Clara opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. He saw a flicker of surprise, then a deep understanding. "Share it," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "With the town," he clarified. "They're desperate, Clara. If we keep it a secret, it won't solve anything. It'll just breed resentment, maybe even violence." He knew he was asking a lot. This spring was their salvation, a guarantee of survival in a world where water was more precious than gold. To share it meant risking their own security, opening themselves up to potential danger. Clara looked at the spring, then at Hope, then back at Jed. The lines around her eyes deepened as she considered the weight of his suggestion. "They'll take it all," she said quietly, her voice tinged with a weariness that belied her years. They'll drain it dry and leave us with nothing. Maybe, Jed conceded, but maybe not. Maybe it'll remind them what it means to be a community, to help each other. Maybe it'll be enough. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. It's your land, Clara. Your decision. I think it's the right thing to do. Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his. She saw the conviction in his gaze, the unwavering belief in the goodness of humanity, a belief that she had long since abandoned. She sighed, the sound like the rustling of dry leaves. All right, Jed, she said finally, her voice firm. We'll share it, but we do it on our terms. Closed hearts, ailing hope. Emboldened by their shared purpose and invigorated by the spring's crystal flow, Jed sought out Silas Blackwood the following morn. He spotted him by the mercantile, eyes narrowed against the sun as dust devils spiraled down Main Street. The etched lines on Silas's weathered face seemed carved deeper overnight. Silas, Jed began, a steady tone masking the unease churning within. About the spring, Silas's flinty gaze flickered over Jed, then returned to the dust-laden street. Well, rancher, Clara and we want to share it. With hope. A dry chuckle rasped from Silas's throat, like the rustle of parched corn stalks. Charity from you? I'd sooner drain the last puddle from a dried well. Jed's jaw clenched, expecting resistance, but the raw animosity still stung. It's not charity, Silas, it's survival. We all need it. This town needs it. He swept his hand toward the horizon, where the land lay thirsty and cracked. This town needs water. Silas shifted, his boots stirring the gritty soil. You think a little water washes away what you did? Think we've forgotten? The unspoken accusations hung, heavy as the dust-filled air. Jed's past, a specter, always threatened to consume him. It's about doing what's right, Silas. For everyone. Right? Silas spat, the gobbet disappearing into the dust. Right is the law. Right is punishing the guilty, not accepting your tainted gifts. He stopped short of naming Jed's perceived transgressions, the word that branded him an outsider, but the implication was clear. The buoyancy Jed felt earlier began to dissipate. Silas's rigid stance, the cold glint in his eye, prejudice, like the drought, had withered the man's soul. Think about the people, Silas, the children. Silas merely turned his back, dismissing Jed with a flick of his wrist. Get off my street. Your presence poisons the air. Keep your tainted water. Deflated, Jed returned to Clara's farm, finding her tending to her meager garden, a small patch of green against the desolate landscape. As he recounted the conversation, the words turned to bitter soot in his mouth. She listened, her expression etched with weary acceptance. Finally, she gave a small nod. I suspected as much. That evening, Hope's fever spiked, her small frame shaking with chills. Her breath hitched and fluttered in her chest. A cold fist squeezed Jed's heart. He bathed her brow, but the heat persisted. We need the doctor, he choked out, fear constricting his throat. Clara's face tightened with a grim knowledge. Dr. Albright won't come. Jed stared, disbelief warring with a rising panic. What do you mean he won't? He's a doctor. He answers to Silas Blackwood. Clara's voice was flat, a somber acknowledgement of reality. He won't risk Silas's disapproval by helping you. Desperate, Jed wrapped Hope in a blanket and carried her toward town. The night air was crisp, yet her skin scorched his touch. He marched directly to Dr. Albright's home, ignoring the wary, hostile glances from those still lingering on the streets. He hammered on the door, knuckles aching. After an agonizing wait, a light appeared, and the door cracked open. Dr. Albright peered out, his face pale and drawn. Jedediah, he whispered, what is it? My daughter is sick. She needs your help. Jed gently pushed past the doctor into the shadowed hallway. Please, doctor, she's burning up. Dr. Albright retreated, his eyes darting around nervously. I can't, Jedediah. You know I can't. But she's just a child. She's innocent, Jed pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. I have a family to consider, Dr. Albright stammered, his voice quivering. Silas. Silas wouldn't approve. Damn Silas. Jed roared, his control finally shattered. Are you a healer or a coward? Dr. Albright winced. Please, Jedediah, you must leave. I can't help you. He gently but firmly ushered Jed back towards the door. I'm sorry. Stumbling back onto the street, clutching his burning child, the full weight of the town's rejection crashed over Jed. In the windows, he saw faces mirroring pity, fear, and condemnation. No one would extend a hand. Hope was on her own. Clara met him at the edge of town, her face illuminated by the sliver of moon. She took Hope in her arms, her touch gentle yet firm. I know a few things about nursing, she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. We'll do what we can. As they walked back toward the farm, Jed gazed down at his daughter's feverish face. A single tear carved a path through the grime on his cheek. The spring, once a symbol of promise, now mocked them. Water was one thing, but a hardened heart was a parched land no spring could ever irrigate. A father's plea. The sun blazed upon the cracked earth, an echo of the inferno raging within Hope. Jed's gaze remained fixed on her, anxiety carving deep lines into his face. The soft cadence of her breathing was the only sound that dared challenge Clara's quiet melody. Clara was relentless, pressing cool cloths to Hope's fevered brow, coaxing life-giving tea between her parched lips. Yet Hope's salvation lay in redemption with Dr. Albright. He glanced at Clara, her brow a tight knot of concern as she ministered to the child. I have to go, he rasped, his voice thick with unshed tears. Clara's humming ceased. Her eyes, pools of understanding clouded with dread, met his. Jed, please don't. Not now. I have to try, Clara. I can't simply stand by and watch. The unspoken horror hung heavy in the air. I'll reason with Silas. I'll grovel if necessary. But Albright needs to see her. Clara rose, her hand a silent supplication on his arm, but he gently broke the contact. Stay with her, he pleaded. Please, I'll return as quickly as I can. He pressed a kiss to Hope's burning forehead, the stark heat a dire reminder of the ticking clock. He turned then and walked towards redemption, dust devils swirling around his worn boots like taunting demons. The wagon's journey was a protracted agony, each protesting groan of the wheels, each stinging lash of wind-blown grit, served only to amplify the urgency of his quest. As he approached town, the familiar weight of animosity settled upon him like a suffocating blanket. He felt their collective stare, heard the murmurs, sensed the tangible disapproval. Ignoring their judgment, he focused solely on Hope, on the fragile image of her flushed face. He steered the wagon directly to Silas Blackwood's mercantile, the epicenter of redemption's coldness. He secured the reins and stepped onto the parched street, his boots striking the silence like hammer blows. The townsfolk stiffened, their conversations sputtering to a halt. Every eye was riveted upon him. He entered the mercantile, the bell above the door clanging a discordant welcome. Behind the counter, Silas stood, his face a stony tableau of contempt. The other patrons, a scattering of farmers and their wives, recoiled, leaving him isolated. Blackwood, Jed stated, his voice even despite the turmoil in his gut. Silas offered no acknowledgement, instead continuing to polish a shotgun with excruciating care. The air thickened, stifling. My daughter is desperately ill, Jed repeated, his voice amplified, shattering the oppressive stillness. She needs a doctor. I implore you, as a father, to allow Dr. Albright to examine her. Silas finally raised his gaze, his eyes sharp and cold as glacial shards. Your daughter, he spat, a tainted seed, the product of your transgressions. Why should I extend a hand to her? Or do you? She's innocent, Jed implored, the word wrenched from him. She bears no blame in this. Please, Silas, I'm begging you, send for the doctor. Silas emitted a dry, rasping chuckle. You're begging? After your actions? After the shame you heaped upon this town? You believe a few crocodile tears will sway me. Jed's fists clenched, battling the rising tide of fury. "This isn't about me," he asserted, his voice strained. "This is about a child's life hanging in the balance. Please, Silas. I'll do anything." Silas leaned forward, his voice a sibilant whisper, dripping with malice. "Anything? If you truly desire to aid your daughter, then leave. Take your illegitimate child and that woman and vanish from redemption. Never darken our doorstep again. Only then will you offer this town any solace." Jed stared, the faint glimmer of hope extinguished, replaced by a steely resolve. He understood that reason was futile. He pivoted and exited the mercantile, the townsfolk's gazes like burning brands on his back. Back at the cabin, Clara was a whirlwind of worried motion, her gaze glued to the horizon. Each rustle of leaves, each distant call of a bird, ignited a spark of anticipation, swiftly doused by a wave of despair. Hope whimpered, a fragile, heart-rending sound that pierced Clara's soul. She soaked a cloth in cool water, gently wiping Hope's brow, murmuring soft reassurances. She felt utterly helpless, imprisoned by Silas Blackwood's venom and the town's silent approval. She knew Jed risked everything, venturing into the heart of enemy territory. She could only pray for his return. She prayed he would bring help. She prayed he would return at all. The sun began its descent, painting the western sky with vibrant strokes of orange and violet, a breathtaking panorama that offered no solace, no promise of deliverance. Only deepening shadows, and the agonizing fear that Jed might not return before nightfall. Turning tides. The relentless sun scorched Clara's withered garden, a stark echo of the fever-consuming hope. Each chime of the mantel clock reverberated through Clara's head like a blacksmith's hammer. She dabbed cool cloths on Hope's brow, murmuring endearments, but the child remained lost in a furnace dream. The surrounding stillness, broken only by a hawk's lonely cry, felt oppressive. Jed's absence stretched into an agonizing eternity. Clara envisioned him pleading before Silas Blackwood, his resolve eroded by desperation. Jed's love for Hope was a fierce, unwavering beacon, brighter than any desert sun. But could it thaw Blackwood's glacial heart? A low rumble broke the tension. Wagon wheels. Clara flew to the window, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs. It was Jed, slumped on the wagon seat, his face a mask of exhaustion. Beside him sat Dr. Albright. Clara burst from the house, boots stirring up dust devils. "Jed, what happened?" He looked up, his eyes bloodshot but holding a flicker of hope. "He's here, Clara. He's going to see Hope." Dr. Albright, a man whose lined face whispered of countless nights spent battling illness, descended from the wagon, his black bag an emblem of quiet competence. "Let's take a look at this little one, shall we?" Inside, the air hung heavy with the odors of sickness and apprehension. With practiced gentleness, Dr. Albright examined Hope, his brow furrowed in thought. He listened to her breathing, felt for her pulse, and peered into her vacant eyes. After an agonizing stretch, he straightened. "Pneumonia," he pronounced, his tone grave. "She's seriously ill, but not beyond help. I'll need hot water, clean linens, and—" He paused, his gaze meeting Clara's. "Whiskey, if you have any." Clara nodded, already in motion, gathering what he needed. Jed stood immobile, his face a canvas of worry. As Dr. Albright began his work, Jed finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Blackwood, he refused at first. He wanted us to leave redemption." "But you convinced him?" Clara asked, her hands trembling as she wrung out a cloth. Jed shook his head. "I don't know. I just stood there, talking about Hope, how she loves the butterflies in your garden, how she still asks about her mother, how she's all I have and I would do anything to save her. Then I collapsed. I think he saw something in my face. I think he glimpsed Hope's spirit in my eyes. I don't know. All I know is he sent for the doctor." Hours bled into one another. Dr. Albright toiled relentlessly, battling the fever with cool applications and administering a concoction of herbs and spirits. Clara and Jed remained at Hope's bedside, their vigil punctuated by hushed prayers and watchful glances. Finally, as dawn's first light brushed the sky, Hope stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, and a soft whimper escaped her lips. Dr. Albright bent near, listening intently. "Papa," she breathed, her voice fragile but distinct. Jed caught his breath, tears springing to his eyes. He reached out, stroking her hair with infinite tenderness. "I'm here, Hope. I'm right here." Hope opened her eyes, a faint smile gracing her face. "I'm thirsty," she whispered. Dr. Albright's face lit up. "That's the finest sound I've heard all night. A little water, and she'll be on the mend in no time." Relief crashed over Clara like a tidal wave. She sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. Hope would recover. Word of Hope's plight and Dr. Albright's visit rippled through Redemption. The townspeople, quick to judge Jed and Clara, began to whisper amongst themselves. Some recalled Jed's prior acts of kindness, his willingness to lend a hand before the drought had turned neighbor against neighbor. Some remembered Hope's joyous laughter echoing across the town square. As Dr. Albright gathered his instruments, preparing to return, a small group congregated outside Clara's dwelling. They lingered at a distance, their expressions a blend of shame and curiosity. Silas Blackwood was absent, yet his influence cast a long shadow in the silence. Dr. Albright paused at the gate, addressing the gathering. "The child will live," he announced, his voice ringing clearly. "Thanks to the devoted care she received here." He nodded towards Clara. "And thanks to a father's boundless love." He mounted his wagon and departed, leaving the townsfolk to confront their own consciences. The tide, it appeared, was shifting. Water, truth, and hope. The dawn, which usually cast a garish light on the suffering land, felt different that morning. Hope's fever had broken, leaving her frail but alive. A profound conviction settled in Jed's soul. The waiting game was finished. He discovered Clara in her meager garden, brow creased as she coaxed life from the arid soil. Kneeling, he covered her hand with his. "I'm sharing the water, Clara." Her eyes mirrored the dread that had haunted him. "Jed, are you certain?" Blackwood be damned," he stated, his voice resolute. "Hope nearly perished. I refuse to watch this town crumble under one man's tyranny." He readied his wagon, its aged timbers groaning, and crammed every vessel with the spring's precious liquid. Hope, wrapped in blankets, sat beside him, her tiny hand a reassuring anchor. Clara rode shotgun, a silent vow etched on her face. The townsfolk watched their approach, faces a mix of skepticism and raw yearning. Jed halted in the dusty square, the only sound the soft nicker of his horse. "This water," he announced, his voice reverberating between the buildings, "comes from Clara's land. She offers it freely to any who thirst." A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd. Silas Blackwood's men shuffled, unease flickering in their eyes. Jed paid them no mind. He began distributing the water, prioritizing the frail elderly and families with children. As they drank, a wave of relief washed over the people, the suffocating tension giving way. Even Sheriff Buckley, not known for his leniency, offered Jed a brief, respectful nod. The distribution continued for hours, until the last container was drained. As Jed prepared to depart, uproar erupted near the outskirts. Two bruised men were being dragged into the square by a posse of ranchers. "Caught them red-handed, Sheriff," one bellowed, trying to rustle Blackwood's cattle. The pair, faces ashen with dread, confessed. They were Blackwood's pawns, tasked with instigating chaos and deflecting blame onto Jed. Blackwood aimed to eliminate Jed, driven by jealousy of both the water and his ranching skills. The revelation resonated through the crowd like thunder. The simmering resentment previously aimed at Jed now surged towards Silas Blackwood. The ranchers, faces set like granite, swore to see justice prevail. With Jed's reputation cleared and water flowing, the town underwent a metamorphosis. Gardens drank deep, livestock thrived, and the embers of community rekindled. The drought's specter remained, but it was now accompanied by hope's burgeoning light. Days melted into weeks. Hope regained her vigor, her laughter dancing through Clara's humble abode. Jed aided Clara with her chores, his presence filling the void that had echoed within her for so long. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset blaze across the sky, Jed clasped Clara's hand. "Clara," he said, his voice thick with sincerity, "you saved Hope's life and mine. You gave us refuge when we were adrift. He hesitated, searching for the right cadence. "I love you." Clara's eyes widened, brimming with tears. "I love you too, Jed," she breathed, her voice trembling. "More than I dared to dream possible." Hope, sensing the emotional swell, rushed to embrace them, her small arms encircling them both. They held her close, a family forged in hardship, united by abiding love. The town embraced them too. The old prejudices dissolved, replaced by unity and thankfulness. Clara's solitary existence was over. She had found family, purpose, and a love that overflowed in her heart. The spring on her land had resurrected the parched earth, but had also unearthed something far more valuable: truth, the promise of a better future, and a love impervious to the trials ahead. The community banded together, pooling labor and resources to improve the well and devise a better irrigation system. Jed, Clara, and Hope were no longer outcasts, but the very heart of the reinvigorated town.